Morning, here we go now. President Biden making no apologies for that chaotic exit out of Afghanistan, touting the mission as an extraordinary success. A lot of fallout after that as we say good morning. Midweek moment it is. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning.
Easy for you to say. Good morning. I'm Dana Perino. This is America's Newsroom. It's good to be with you again.
If you were running the comms department at the White House.
Oh, you know that's my favorite game.
Yeah, and okay. So, what do you do about this speech yesterday? Was it appropriate? Was it right? Did it meet the moment? Was it the right tone? Or would you have encouraged to do a primetime address and take reporters for an hour in the East Room of the White House? Is it A or is it B?
Well, I would have written a different speech. And I would have done a prime time address. I don't know if I would have taken questions. I think I would have let that stand. But then I would have followed it up with a press conference today. Does that answer?
Okay. All right. Go for that.
Okay.
I don't know if we're going to get that press conference today.
We're not going to get that press conference today. That was just, you just asked me, my favorite game if I was running White House comms. President Biden yesterday, so he's again deflecting blame for his messy operation while addressing the nation yesterday. He pointed the finger at everyone from President Trump to Afghan security forces and even some of those Americans who were left behind. The president claiming the State Department reached out to them 19 times since
the Taliban, and they are decked out in billions of dollars of U.S. military equipment. The images stoking outrage and fueling calls for the president's top military advisors to resign.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Mark Milley are expected to take questions at 1 p.m. Eastern today. This amid a growing push to hold the White House accountable.
We're going to live with the reality of the Taliban and the humiliating abandonment of Afghanistan by Joe Biden for years to come.
Joe Biden has learned nothing in the last 20 years. This is the biggest mistake since 9/11.
The world is definitely a more dangerous place just because we're out of Afghanistan.
That are now hostages.
Is here with reaction. Let's begin with the White House, where Peter Doocy is live on the North Lawn. Peter, just looking at all of the commentary this morning, where do you think the president believes that, whose fault it is that Americans are left behind in Afghanistan?
Dana, it seems like if somebody is stranded in Afghanistan, President Biden thinks that's their fault because the State Department gave them a big heads up.
Since March, we reached out 19 times to Americans in Afghanistan with multiple warnings and offers to help them leave Afghanistan, all the way back as far as March. Now we believe that about 100 to 200 Americans remain in Afghanistan with some intention to leave. The bottom line, 90% of Americans in Afghanistan who wanted to leave were able to leave.
We're also now learning that as the president publicly said that it was unlikely the Taliban could quickly take over, he privately knew it was coming, telling the former Afghan president in a Reuters transcript, quote, "I need not tell you the perception around the world and in parts of Afghanistan, I believe, is that things are not going well in terms of the fight against the Taliban. And there is a need, whether it is true or not, there is a need to project a different picture." But despite that, the president is now trying to claim he actually didn't see it coming.
That assumption that the Afghan government would be able to hold on for a period of time beyond military drawdown turned out not to be accurate.
President Biden also continues to blame the conditions on the ground in Afghanistan that led to everything we've seen in the last few months on Donald Trump. Dana.
Peter, what do we know about the interpreter who once helped President Biden when he was a senator, but this interpreter remains in Afghanistan?
Yes, we know that this interpreter, who is only known in a Wall Street Journal piece as Mohammed, wants to come home but can't. And we know that he was part of a day that was so impactful on then Senator Biden that he has told the story of this day many times, including here at the White House.
Lieutenant General Richardson, who I might add, I want to thank you for getting me off a mountain that was about 12 to 14,000 feet up on a goat path when our helicopter went down in a snowstorm.
The interpreter has a message for President Biden. Don't forget me here. As of last night, the White House Chief of Staff says President Biden hadn't seen it. Dana.
All right, Peter Doocy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. Now to the Pentagon now as we await to hear from top military leaders a bit later today morning.
Good morning, Bill. We can expect the first look back from the military about how this evacuation was conducted. In his first public remarks since the last plane departed from Kabul, General Mark Milley had a message for veterans of the war.
for any soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine and their family. Your service mattered. And it was not.
That attack at the Kabul airport gave their lives to save others. There's no higher calling. Weeks ago, after the fall of Kabul to the Taliban, General Mark Milley explained why Bagram Air Base was closed.
Our task, given to us at that time, our task was to protect the embassy in order for the embassy personnel to continue to function with their consular services and all that. If we were to keep both Bagram and the embassy going, that would be a significant number of military forces that would have exceeded what we had or stayed the same.
U.S. forces depart Afghanistan so rapidly and were just about all out of the country in early July. There's also questions about why so many Afghan interpreters were left behind and those evacuated who were not evacuated helped the U.S. military for 2 decades. The percentages of those special immigrant visas who were evacuated are actually quite small. The State Department and Pentagon are refusing to say just how many were among the more than 100,000 Afghan refugees evacuated. The White House also insisting it was the generals which decided which airport to close.
On the tactical decision of which is the right airport to have for an evacuation, of course, any responsible president would give significant weight to the advice of the commanders on the ground, and their advice was to close Bagram and focus on Kabul.
But officials here at the Pentagon are pushing back, saying they were ordered to go to zero by the President of the United States, just leave a small embassy presence behind. They were forced to close Bagram and abandon many Afghan allies.
Thank you, Lucas. Talk to you a bit later this morning at the Pentagon. Lucas.
Veteran who served with the Central Command's Middle East Assessment Team under General David Petraeus. Now he's on the House Armed Services Committee. Could I just play one thing for you? Because as we think about the Americans, and the New York Times reporting this morning, hundreds of American citizens and green card holders are stranded or even abandoned in Afghanistan. It's not available for us, but this is President Biden. I just want to read one thing to you. Now it's good. Okay, let's play it.
Will not conduct a hasty rush to the exit. We'll do it responsibly, deliberately, and safely. There is a home for you in the United States, if you so choose, and we will stand with you just as you stood with us. If there's American citizens left, we're going to stay till we get them all out.
But we know that, Congressman, that didn't turn out to be true.
The president continues to lie. There is no plan post August 31st for getting American citizens or getting our allies out, other than to put all our hopes and dreams on the goodwill of the Taliban. They think they have leverage because the Taliban want humanitarian assistance, they want international recognition. What the Taliban wants is to humiliate us. They have beaten us on the battlefield because we surrendered preemptively. We have no leverage. And for the president to go on TV last night and to call this an extraordinary success was shameful. It will go down as the lie of the decade. 12 Marines, 1 sailor dead that did not need to die is not a success. Hundreds of Americans stranded behind enemy lines is not a success. Tens of billions of dollars worth of military equipment given to the Taliban is not a success. This is a historic, humiliating failure, and the commander-in-chief's failure to recognize that is compounding the problem. And more to the point, the victim blaming in the speech was just appalling.
Wow. You proposed a bill yesterday. It was shot down by your Democratic colleagues. Kind of makes sense after what we're watching the last 2.5 weeks. You want to know the plan for what the administration has to bring Americans home. You're requesting an accounting of all the equipment left behind in the billions. You want transparency on any deals or agreements made by the administration with the Taliban. That would be fascinating. You want a sense that Congress should not recognize the Taliban. You want to prevent any federal funding or sanctions relief for the Taliban. I would think that you would get a majority of the American people would say yes on all those provisions. Does this die now in the dark halls of Washington, D.C.?
Well, yesterday when I went to the House floor to ask recognition that the bill be considered, Afghanistan and Iraq, and we were gavelled down by the Speaker on the floor. We couldn't even have a debate about the bill. So I'm very discouraged that the Democrats in private are saying one thing, saying they agree with this, but in public, when given the opportunity to actually vote on legislation that would allow Congress to do basic oversight so that we ensure that we don't leave any Americans behind, they're not willing to join us in that effort. So I hope they'll change their mind. I hope the Speaker will reconvene Congress and consider this common sense legislation. But thus far, she's chosen to prioritize her progressive domestic priorities over bringing Americans back home.
To that point, you're going to take up the Defense Department spending bill, and they want to cut it. Now, there are some people in America think that the Defense Department has way too much money, but at this moment, they've been shaved over and over again. President Trump tried to put some more money back in. How do you think that will go when they're trying to pass, $3.5 trillion in human infrastructure and tying the Defense Department down with cuts?
Well, in less than an hour, the Armed Services Committee will convene to mark up the defense authorization bill. Thanks to the leadership of Ranking Member Rogers, I believe we have a chance to increase that top-line number for defense spending. And also, we'll be taking my bill from yesterday and submitting it as amendments to the defense authorization bill, again, to conduct basic oversight and ensure that we aren't abandoning Americans, potentially to become hostages of the Taliban or sold to al-Qaeda. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that today we can begin to repair some of the damage that was done. But when you have our leaders at the highest levels, our commander-in-chief, continuing to refuse to accept any responsibility, and not just blaming our Afghan allies, but casting American service members as victims of their own chosen profession, using us as an excuse to surrender. We chose to fight. We trained to fight. Mr. President, don't blame us for your cowardice.
Mike Gallagher, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Don't know if you're going to have success on this. It's tough to be in the minority. You don't get much done. I mean, right? I mean, you found that out yesterday, didn't you?
Very true. So let's take back the majority.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate
Okay, Mike
you.
Gallagher from The Hill. Go ahead, Dana.
Well, there's a couple of things from yesterday. Yes. As you mentioned, the president didn't take questions yesterday, so he gave his speech. Let's take a look. He walked away from reporters, but he's just like us, right? He forgot his mask, had to go back and get it.
It was time to end a 20-year war. Thank you so much.
All right. I don't think we have the end of that.
So many times here that we've seen him come out and make statements and turn around. The reporters just screaming, and you see his head just go out of the room. I think millions of people are watching this wondering, give us something. Gallagher's point there is well taken. And we're going to get into this Wall Street Journal piece, which is a must-read, by the way. You and I were talking about it last night. There's just so many amazing lines here. Here's one. Mr. Biden wants to take credit for putting out the fire he started. Think about that.
Right, they talk about the arsonists wanting to get
He's
credit.
going to take credit for the fire he started, given the exit and the chaos out of Afghanistan. That's just one thing. Here, just a few other quotes here, Dana. Claimed he was hamstrung by Donald Trump's bad deal with the Taliban. Only choices were total withdrawal or escalation with thousands of troops. Blame Americans for not leaving Afghanistan sooner and Afghans not fighting. Says the war in Afghanistan is now over. And that last point will be debated for a very long time.
Well, also about letting, American citizens of Afghanistan know that they should leave. He says that, they told him 19 times to leave. I'd like to see where those 19 times are. State Department cables, they're not necessarily the most compelling reads, and I don't know if their urgency was there, but even think about just a few weeks before all of this went down, President Biden said, very unlikely there's going to be any problem, and so there wasn't that urgency. There are school children, American school children, who are stuck over there still.
We're not going to forget them. And we'll still be on it after Labor Day. And after Labor Day weekend, what you're going to hear from the administration is there's going to be a big push for the trillions of dollars that they want to spend. And the argument is going to be, look how much money we're saving from overseas, and we'll spend it on the Americans back here in the U.S. And that's the debate. And that will be the center for Washington, D.C. Into September. Okay, much more coming up in a moment here. Another alert right now. I want to tell you about this. Flames moving closer to Lake Tahoe. Thousands flee to safety. We'll take you there live and let you know how they're doing
Very
today.
scary out there. Plus, no power, no water, and scorching heat. All adding to the misery after Hurricane Ida. How folks on the Gulf Coast are coping.
Also, Dana, Democrats running for cover from the debacle in Kabul. Republicans determined now to hold him accountable. So how does this play out? Newt Gingrich will give us analysis coming up in moments. Stay tuned for that.
The lies have got to stop. The accountability needs to be there. But most importantly, Americans need to be able to be brought home.
20 past, Fox News alert. Search and rescue operations underway after a U.S. Navy helicopter crashes. Bring us the details as the sun breaks there today. Matt, good morning.
Bill, a Coast Guard commander, tells Fox News this morning that the urgent search and rescue for the 5 missing people is ongoing right now as the sun rises here in Southern California. The Navy says the overnight search was by air and water with help from the Coast Guard. The MH-60 helicopter crashed into the sea about 60 miles off the coast of San Diego late afternoon yesterday during a routine for the status of that one person that was rescued or where they were taken. The helicopter was embarked on the USS Abraham Lincoln based in San Diego. The MH-60 is considered a versatile aircraft that is used in missions including combat support, disaster relief, and search and rescues. Bill, we will keep you updated as we learn more about the crash this morning.
Certainly. Thank you, Matt. Matt Finn live in L.A. on that. Thanks.
Yeah.
New weather threats for the storm-ravaged Gulf states. A massive heat wave sending temperatures with an update for us. Hi, Steve.
Hey, good morning, Dana. We're in the lower 9th ward here, and already it's just after 8 a.m. local time. Feels like temperatures into the mid-90s. So the concern moving forward for the next 48 hours are those temperatures starting to rise into the triple digits. And it's not just here in Louisiana, but also Mississippi. Louisiana has over 900,000 people without power. Mississippi over 30,000 people. But when you're looking at feels like temperatures into the triple digits, that is the concern moving forward, is how quickly can we restore power and how quickly can we get those residents some AC. Now, I want to show you an example, one of many that we've seen here. This is a downed power line. Notice how the hurricane force winds just snapped this like a twig, and it is now leaning up against this building here. This is in the lower 9th ward of New Orleans. But the main concern was 8 massive transmission towers that were knocked down. That took out the bulk of the power. Now, in order to get this restored, they had to fix those transmission powers. Here's the good news. Entergy, which is one of the leading parts of eastern New Orleans. The reason why this takes a while, though, is look at this street. It's nice and clear. That's because they've been working around the clock the last 2 days to clear the debris and to get those trucks in here to be able to reestablish power into these different parts of the community. The big concern, though, is the fact that this is New Orleans. There are so many people without power. How quickly can we get those transmission towers back up? And then outlying communities like Houma, Thibodaux, Dulac, Grand Isle, they are on the same power grid and they are completely decimated. They could be without power for weeks, something that we will continue to track for you here in New Orleans. Reporting live, send it back to you, Dana.
Steve Bender, thank you. Great to have you aboard as well. Thanks.
They're forcing mass evacuations. About 200,000 acres, about 18% contained. Get more in a live report from South Lake Tahoe coming up next hour. From the
Afghanistan, a crowd pouring into the streets, apparently holding a mock funeral for the United States. We'll have more on that. Plus, President Biden looking to turn the page on this foreign policy disaster and resume his push for trillions in new spending. We'll talk about that and more with Newt Gingrich coming right up. Celebrating after the U.S. withdrawal. The photos appear to show Taliban fighters holding mock funerals for foreign soldiers, carrying boxes that look like caskets draped in the flags of allied forces. Trey Inks is live in Doha, Qatar. Hi, Trey.
Dana, good morning. The Taliban is certainly going on a victory lap this week. We saw those images out of southern Afghanistan of a mock funeral with American and NATO flags draped over coffins. Also, the image equipment. And there are even reports today of the Taliban staging a parade with all of the gear they obtained. But once those celebrations are over, the group faces the uphill task of governing a country. Already across the Afghan capital, you can see lines at banks. People report that you can only withdraw between $100 and $200 US every 24 hours. Shop owners also complain that people simply aren't shopping as much.
2 weeks ago, the market was good and people were buying. But now the situation is not good and no one buys. And people's money is stuck in the banks, and no one has money to buy anything.
The economic downturn comes as thousands continue to flee Afghanistan on foot. There are efforts underway right now to build a safety corridor for foreigners and vulnerable Afghans who do want to flee through neighboring Iran or Pakistan, but those countries do not want a huge influx of refugees. Now, the UN Secretary General is warning half of Afghanistan's population right now relies on humanitarian aid just for survival, and the current crisis could make that number rise. Today, a Qatari military plane did land in Kabul, an indication that not only the Qataris, but possibly the Turkish government going to help the Taliban to get that airport in the Afghan capital of Kabul up and running again, which could open this window to civilian flights and allow some of those Americans who are trapped to leave. Dana.
All right, Trey Yings, thank you.
Yes, the American people should hear this. $300 million a day for 2 decades. If you take the number of 1 trillion, as many say, that's still $150 million a day for 2 decades. And what have we lost as a consequence in terms of opportunities? I refuse to continue a war that was no longer in the service of the vital national interest of our people.
So you can expect to hear a lot about that point, that debate. Expect we'll hear more about the money. Here to talk about that, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, also the author of the upcoming book, Beyond Biden. How you doing, Sarah? And good morning. Good morning to you. We're talking to Mike Gallagher a moment, the Republican from Wisconsin. He served overseas. He had a lot of good points that he really wants to draw out of this administration. Not sure if he's going to succeed or not. But just on that point right there, I mean, does this all die in the abyss of Washington, D.C.?
Oh, I doubt it, just because, you know, Afghanistan's going to go on. The Taliban's going to go on. We're going to find out if the president was right, are still in Afghanistan. That's potentially a hostage crisis on a giant scale. Now, we don't know what the Taliban's going to do. They could say any American who wants to can leave, you know, come to the airport, there'll be planes coming in, et cetera. But there's also a possibility that at least one part of the Taliban is in a very aggressive attitude. They've been out killing people. We've seen this. They have begun to hunt down people who helped the Americans. They've shot at least 2 police chiefs for having helped the Americans. And so if they decide to go in a retribution cycle, you're going to see a lot of people die in the next 3 to 6 months. So we just don't know how they're going to govern at this stage. They spent 20 years in war. They didn't spend 20 years preparing to take over the country and govern it. Their goal was just desperation, survive long enough for the Americans to get tired and go home.
In the soundbite that we started with, the president talked about how much money will be saved that is not being spent in Afghanistan that we could spend here at home. Here's, you know, they want to spend $3.5 trillion in this human infrastructure bill. They're going to start debating now. And the combined spending plans, if you look at this, call for 2 folks, is $1.7 trillion for the American Jobs Plan, $1.8 trillion for the American Families Plan, and $1.9 trillion for the American Rescue Plan. So, in a way, sir, I do think that might be persuasive for some people to hear that. What do you think?
Well, I mean, it might be. I think there are 2 challenges. One is we did a survey, and by something like 59 to 16, people preferred free market capitalism to big government socialism. So I'm not sure a Bernie Sanders $3.5 trillion big government socialist bill is going to be very popular once people actually look at it. Second, this is going to cause this collapse in Afghanistan, the way that Biden presided over a total disaster. This is going to cause us to have to think about funding against China for any money by having proven that we're weak and afraid to stay and that we're willing to cut and run. I think, if anything, the world's going to turn out to be more dangerous, and we may actually be forced into, just as Jimmy Carter was, spending more money on defense because of the nature of our enemies.
I don't know what you thought of the president's tone yesterday. It's getting a lot of attention. A lot of people writing it off. But Dana pointed out there was a reporter at the briefing. Jen Psaki briefed after the president came out. I think Fox, we took most of it. The others took a little bit of it, I think. Dana, what was the question the reporter said?
It was Ed O'Keefe of CBS. He said that a lot of people in the room had noticed that President Biden seemed very angry. And the question was, who are you mad at?
Yeah. So just think about that now as you look at these poll numbers from ABC. They found that 71% until all allied Afghans are evacuated. So think about the polling numbers. Think about what they're looking at from a strategy aspect internally in the White House. Why do you come out with such a forceful defense as he did yesterday?
Look, I think he is, I'm guessing, but my guess is that he is extremely angry. He saw himself as a heroic figure getting us out of a 20-year war, and then it all went to pieces. I mean, the imagery of him at Dover receiving the fallen bodies while looking at his watch was as devastating as anything I've seen. And to have the Gold Star families, the parents and the relatives of the dead, to have them erupt against the president in that kind of a setting is literally unprecedented. I don't care which prior president was involved. And he must right now feel like he's almost trapped, because every time he turns around, there's somebody telling him how stupid this is, or how bad it is, or how destructive it is. And I think he's decided he's just going to go straight forward. He's going to force his way through and hope that we'll go to a new topic and we'll get beyond this. And I think he's in for a rude shock. There are certain events, 9/11 was one of them, which are historic. They don't disappear, they don't go away. The way he left Afghanistan was so humiliating, and the notion that we would, by his own words, that we would leave 10% of our people behind, that is so un-American and such a violation of our traditions that I think he's going to find that this is just not going to stop. And I think Milley and Austin are going to find that the demands for their resignation are just going to keep growing, because there are no defenses for how badly they did this. I mean, this is the sort of project you could have given to a half-dozen lieutenants and captains, and they would not have done any worse than the chairman of the Joint Chief and the Secretary of Defense.
Sir, thank you for your time. Appreciate seeing you again. New Cambridge.
Thank you.